I had always been taught growing up, look on the bright side of things. There's always a silver lining. Don't focus on the negative. Actually, trusting God can also look like grief at the same time as faith. And what that looks like at the end of the day is God gave me this clear video idea that I was like, it's kind of random, but it just feels like I need to share it and talk about it. How to navigate uncomfortable feelings while also having faith and trust in God. This is such an important topic because a lot of the times we are taught or just conditioned to think that if you trust God, you're always happy, you're always have a smile on your face, and if you're sad or grieving or in pain, that means you're not trusting God enough. That means you're not praying hard enough. And I just look back and I'm kind of amused by how much both me and my husband Alex have kind of helped each other. Like, we influenced each other and helped each other navigate a better way to healthily connect with and process our emotions rather than suppressing them, while also standing firm in God and His truth. When Alex and I first met, something I initially observed slash was a little concerned about was this Eeyore mentality, so I called it. I noticed he would often talk about negative things happening in his life, things not going his way, negative feelings, and honestly, it made me super uncomfortable because I had always been taught growing up, look on the bright side of things. Like, there's always a silver lining. Like, don't focus on the negative. And that's what got me through a lot of hard times as a coping mechanism, was basically just to suck it up, move on, don't let the bad stuff drag you down. Like, that was my mentality, to the point of I was on the opposite side of the spectrum, more in the toxic positivity category, I would say. I remember one specific call we had when we were first long distance where Alex was describing something he was going through and having a hard time with, and my default was to try to find some way to comfort him. Like, what are some words that I can say that'll make him feel better, that brings in God's truth? Because that again was what I was taught to do growing up, so that I didn't get dragged down by these negative thoughts and emotions. But what I soon began to learn from dating Alex was actually the power of empathy, of really being with people in their real emotions, meeting them where they're at. And oftentimes when we try to provide solutions or comforting words too soon without actually just sitting with people, it actually does more harm than good, because it makes people feel like they're not really understood or listened to, or that the other person's kind of just dismissing their pain. So I was really taken aback. I remember during this conversation when Alex mentioned that he felt kind of dismissed or that I wasn't really listening. And for me, I was like, all I'm trying to do is help. Like, what do you mean? And then over time, especially as I did more therapy and counseling and coaching work, and realized for myself that, wow, I do have all these ways where I kind of block out my difficult emotions, escaping in work and distracting myself with social events and friends and happy things that bring me joy, which are not bad things, but when we use them as crutches and as coping mechanisms instead of addressing what's really going on underneath, that basically allows the problems underneath the surface to continue to fester and leak out, and that affect all the other areas of our lives. And honestly, I think a lot of us do this because we're not taught or equipped with the tools on how to process our emotions. It feels scary, daunting, and overwhelming. You just don't want to get sucked into this black hole where you know you're going to start spiraling, because that's literally what used to happen to me all the time. Was once I got into proximity of these negative thoughts and emotions and it kind of like got into my head, I just started spiraling out of control. I was never taught that I could actually take captive my thoughts and filter through my thoughts and exercise control over my thoughts rather than my thoughts controlling me. But if you've ever seen the Lego movie, I think it's so funny how that one cat, she's like in this happy land, she's all smiley and trying to keep positive all the time, but you can see her start to crack, and she shows these signs of like built up rage and anger that haven't been properly expressed. In a way, I think I was kind of like that cat, where I was trying to be positive all the time to the point of not dealing with all the uncomfortable bottled up emotions inside. And inevitably there would be moments where all of a sudden the floodgates would open and I would just have a mental breakdown because I hadn't really processed and dealt with those emotions in a healthy way. Part of that was just this false belief that if I trust God, I need to be able to have peace and be happy and not have these struggles internally, right? Because don't people say that if you pray and you trust God hard enough, then everything else is fine, like you should be fine and dandy. Actually, trusting God can also look like grief at the same time as faith. And what that looks like really, I think at the end of the day, is giving yourself permission to connect with your emotions without judging them, without feeling bad about them, because you also understand that God is not scolding you for having those uncomfortable emotions. In fact, Jesus himself was called a man of sorrows, acquainted with grief. And in so many ways, God understands and is compassionate towards us and our suffering, our pain, whatever we're going through. And he wants us to actually bring it to him, to process it with him, rather than just sweep it under the rug and stuff it under and not properly deal with them. And I think once we understand how God is a loving father who wants to help us, who wants to heal us, and he's patient with us, that really changes a lot. And personally, I was just so blessed to be able to experience this through my now husband, Alex, how patient, understanding, empathetic he was in embracing me fully and not telling me to get over things, not guilting me for feeling certain ways. And through him, that's when I started to actually experience and understand that, oh, I'm safe to be fully me with my entire spectrum of struggles. And I was starting to understand more of God's compassion and love in this way. Versus previously, a lot of the times I just didn't feel safe or given permission to really be my full messy self while also still being fully loved and embraced. The Bible is full of great practical examples, especially in the Psalms and Lamentations, which I've been reading lately, of how the authors just really pour out their hearts honestly to God, and they're in so much despair and pain and struggle, yet at the same time they're still able to cling onto God and find comfort in his faithfulness and his love and his presence and provision, even if their current circumstances were not what they wanted or they were going through things that they just didn't understand in the moment. I think this is so nuanced and difficult, but also so important for us to really get and really understand that we don't need to rush through the process, that God is really patient and kind, and he just wants to walk with us and really help heal us through his love, through his truth, through his presence. But again, the more we try to isolate ourselves or feel like we can't bring it to God, or that we have to somehow figure out how to deal with it ourselves in isolation, that's just not how we were designed to live. And that's how we find ourselves in these downward spirals, because we're trying to do it in a vacuum by ourselves with our own self-help or DIY tactics, when really the only solution to true life and peace is through our relationship with God, who is love, who is the source of life and peace. If you want to practice this, a great way is to just honestly journal down your unfiltered thoughts and emotions, and try not to judge yourself as you're doing this. And as you're pouring out your heart, you can ask God to help you be aware of his presence, what he's speaking to you, how he wants to help you in it, and to really lovingly counsel you, so you're not just stuck in this tunnel of darkness, but you're allowing his light to shine through to expel that darkness. I recently did this even myself when I was going through a hard time and just struggling emotionally, writing down all my thoughts and frustrations and feelings, and it just felt so good to finally let it out instead of having all these tangled thoughts and web of emotions all in my head bottling up. And through writing it out and processing with God, I was then able to actively invite God into it, pray about things, surrender things, and also be reminded of his truth and his perspective, not in a way that negated my struggles, but really in a way that lovingly met me where I was and responded to me with compassion and truth and gentle guidance to correct my mindset and perspectives to align with God's perspective, rather than the lies and false narratives that I had going through my head. Don't force yourself to rush this or do it perfectly, especially when you're first starting to do this. Like with anything, it takes time to practice and be consistent in unlearning the ways that we're so used to dealing with things and learning to adopt this new mindset and approach in a way where we're fully connected to how we're really doing and how God is leading us, rather than us just trying to expedite the process. Something kind of funny that I just wanted to share in contrast to the anecdote I shared earlier. Every night now, either during or after dinner, Alex and I will go through what's called the core emotions wheel, which I'll also share a link to below. We talk about what brought us joy, but also what brought us sadness, fear, guilt, and even shame, either that day or recently, or just whatever comes to mind. And I think if you asked me to do this exercise way back then, I would have been really daunted and even skeptical, but I think now it's been just a really good good tool to help us really process our honest emotions and share how we're really doing, both the ups and the downs. A lot of times we don't really understand why this stuff matters and it just feels fluffy or unnecessary, but I think it really is so key and powerful in deepening our relationships, especially when it comes to God and the closest people we want to build more intimacy with. God gives you full permission to be your full, free self, and you really can bring it all to Him without any fear or reservation, because He already knows everything in your mind and heart anyway. He just wants you to acknowledge it and actively invite Him into it. I hope this helps anyone going through a hard time, wondering what to do and how to stay faithful to God even in the midst of your trials. And I just really hope, if anything, you just feel the permission to take off your mask and be your real self with God, who loves you so, so deeply and just wants to help you. I'll also link a podcast episode that I did with Natasha Smith, who wrote a great book about this. She talks about her own journey with grief and also helping others who are grieving as well. And that interview is full of gems, so I'll link it down below. Like and subscribe if you want more videos that encourage and help you live by faith and be the authentic and free version of yourself you were always meant to be.